This video will demonstrate how to enter a recertification action. Recertifications are used to record changes in household members, income, assets, or expenses, and to change a tenant's rent if applicable. To start, click on Applicant, Applicant Tenant File, type in the name of the tenant whose recertification you want to work on, click Find, select the tenant's name from the selection results. From the applicant tenant file, click on Actions. This will bring up a list of current and prior accounts for this tenant. Select the account that needs the recertification. The steps of the action will vary depending if this program has an income-based rent calculation or not. I will demonstrate the income-based rent calculation first, as it is most common. From the Action screen, click New Action. We are now shown a list of the available action types for this unit. If this is the tenant's annual recertification, select Annual Recert. If the recertification is needed for a rent or household member change and does not fall on the tenant's annual recertification cycle, then choose Interim Recert. I will be selecting Annual Recert as the example for this video. Once you select the type of action, you will need to enter the effective date. The system will use the next month as the default date, but you can change this date as needed. The effective date is the date the rent change will occur, if any. For recertifications, this date should always be the first of a month. Please keep in mind that increases in rent require at least 30-day prior notification to the tenant. The system will not allow actions effective more than 3 months into the future from the current accounting month. Also, for those who have our tenant accounting module, if you are backdating an action beyond the current accounting month that will affect the rent amount, you will need to adjust the tenant ledger for the change in the rent amount after you have completed the action. Please see the video on tenant ledger adjustments for further information. As you can see, there are tabs along the bottom of the action screen. These tabs signify the different sections we will be going through to complete the action and will show you where you are within the action. Clicking the Next button will take you to the next section. If you choose the Express button, it will advance you all the way to the last page of the action, Rent Calc. The Cancel button will cancel the current action and take you back to the prior screen. I will be selecting Next. We are now on the Background tab. This is showing us the projected effective date of the next recertification for this tenant. If you have selected Annual Recert, as we did for this example, the default date will be 1 year from our current effective date. If you selected Interim Recert, the default date would be based on the next re-exam date used on the prior action. You can change this date if needed, but it must be dated after the current effective date. We also see the flat rent amount for this unit. If you want this tenant to pay the flat rent amount, choose Yes. If you leave the answer No, the action will use the tenant's income-based rent calculation for the final rent amount. For this example, I will leave this at No and click Next. This brings us to the Unit tab. This shows us the address and the bedroom size of the tenant's unit, along with their mailing address. If there are corrections or changes needed to the unit information, you can click the Edit button, and this will open the unit file. If the tenant has a different mailing address, such as a post office box, select No, and then enter the appropriate address information. If you leave the selection on Yes, the mailing address fields will remain blank as the system will use the unit's physical address instead. Once everything is correct on the screen, click Next. We are now on the Household tab. This shows us a table of the current household members along with some details such as date of birth, sex, social security number, etc. You should briefly look over the information to make sure everything looks correct. If you notice an error with a household composition or details of a household member, click the Edit button to open the household member screen and make your corrections. If everything is correct on this screen, click Next. This brings us to the Assets tab. This shows us a table of the current assets. If any of the assets are missing or incorrect, click the Edit button to take you to the Assets screen. If your housing program does not include asset income in the rent calculation, this table should be left blank. If everything is correct, click Next. We are now on the Income tab. This shows us a table of the current income for the household. If any income is missing or incorrect, click the Edit button to take you to the Income screen. If everything is correct on this screen, click Next. This brings us to the Deductions tab. This shows us a table of the applicable deductions for the household. The deductions for dependents and elderly disabled are automatically assigned by the system based on the information entered on the Household tab. Some agencies allow additional deductions for things such as medical disability expenses, childcare, travel, etc. If any of these deductions are allowed by your policy, click the Edit button to take you to the Expense screen to enter these items. If everything is correct on this screen, click Next. We are now on the TTP tab. This shows us how the tenant's payment is being calculated based on the TTP, or Total Tenant Payment Percentage. There are no changes to be made on this screen. It is just to show you the calculations the system is making. Please note that if you selected Yes for flat rent on the Background tab, the system will skip over the TTP tab. When ready, click Next. This brings us to the Rent Calc tab. This is the final and most important step of the action. This is where the system is doing the final rent calculations. It is taking the TTP from the prior tab, subtracting the unit's utility allowance, if any. It is then taking this amount and comparing it to the minimum and maximum amounts for this unit to come up with the tenant's rent amount. If this action is completed, this is the amount of rent the tenant will be charged, starting with the effective date. Please note that if you selected flat rent, you will only see the flat rent amount. If you selected Express from the first tab of the action, you would have come directly to this Rent Calc tab. You would have skipped over all of the details for this household and therefore may have missed a possible mistake or needed change, such as next recert date or mailing address. This is why it is especially important that if you use the Express button, that you look over this final rent calculation and make sure it is the amount you are expecting. If you feel you have missed something, you can use the Back button to take you back to a prior tab. You can also click on a specific tab to go back to that specific section. You can then look or make changes to what's needed and click Next to continue back through the action. Once everything looks correct on the final tab, click Finish to complete the action. After completing the Action Notes screen will pop up. This is a place for you to type notes specific to this action if needed. The action notes are completely optional. Please keep in mind that what you type in action notes may be seen by the tenant since it will print on the tenant itemized worksheet. Click Save or Cancel depending if you typed any notes. For a program without an income-based rent calculation, the action is much simpler. From the Action screen, click New Action. Select the appropriate type of recertification from the Type of Action list. either interim or annual recert. Enter the effective date of the action as appropriate. As stated earlier, please keep in mind that recertifications should always be effective on the first of a month, and that increases in rent require at least a 30-day notice. Enter the next recert due date as appropriate. Enter the contract rent amount if needed. Most importantly, enter the monthly tenant charge. This is the amount of rent the tenant will be charged each month. Click Save when complete. You will now be brought back to the action screen, and you will see your newly completed action added to the table. Click on Recert Forms to print paperwork related to the action just completed. It is recommended to print a rent calculation worksheet to place in the tenant's file to document this action. Please refer to the video on Recert Forms for additional information.